Hey everyone, in this video, we're going to talk about step tests, what they are, why they can be useful for your athletes, and how to pick the right modality for those tests. Okay, Andrew, let's kick it off with a simple question. What is a step test?
So a step test is an incremental, increasing physiologic test to measure performance over a wide range of intensities. In the literature, it's known as a GXT, or a graded exercise test. There's a few pieces that are common to all step tests. You have an incremental increase in workload, so starting at a low intensity and finishing at some predetermined high intensity or maximal intensity. You have a predetermined duration of each step. So whether it's a 1-minute step test, a 3-minute step test, or a 5-minute step test, that's the duration that you spend at each intensity. And there's a predetermined intensity. So whether you're starting on a bike at 100 watts and going up to 300 watts, you can do that in 20-watt steps, 40-watt steps, and you can do those for those duration differences as well: 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes.
So what can a step test be used for?
That's a great question. Historically, step tests were used to help find thresholds, lactate thresholds, ventilatory thresholds, VO2 maxes. So to help find information in a way that could be repeatable in future tests. So one of the benefits of step tests is the fact that you can repeat it and watch for changes in performance. What has been ignored in a lot of literature and in a lot of the history of using step tests is the value of the numbers that come out of the low intensity area. So if you start the step test at a low intensity, there's dramatic things that happen physiologically that were often ignored in the literature and haven't really been studied, as well as what happens at the very high end, because everyone always is keen on finding out what happens at the maximal end of things, but they've ignored what's happened at the low intensities, how the heart responds to low intensity exercise, and a small increase in wattage and what happens to the heart rate and the stroke volume, or the lactate, or the muscle oxygenation, or the oxygen consumption. So the value of step tests really can be looking at data across a wide range of intensities and not just waiting for the maximal intensity to use as the assessment piece.
So when would it make sense for a coach to use a step test with their athletes? When would it be useful?
This comes down to my personal feeling about step tests. I think they can be used all the time. For sure, at the beginning of a program, to assess where an athlete is starting from, or a patient, if you're dealing with someone who's new to sports, to get an assessment of or help get an assessment of their physiology at the beginning of the program. Repeating the step test at regular intervals makes a lot of sense to me to assess whether the program's actually gaining the desired effects that you're hoping it's going to, whether that's improvement in performance at low intensity so that they can perform longer duration of training without negative effects, or that they're improving their maximal performance. And you can use step tests to help assess whether the changes are occurring. The other reason to add a step test into a program is to assess where an athlete is on any given day. So when an athlete comes to me and says, "Hey, coach, I'm feeling really tired," well, let's do a step test and see which part of your physiology is actually being affected by this fatigue or by the injury. And you may find that there is a specific system that is being broken down and may need a rest, whether that's the cardiac system or the respiratory system. And so in using VO2 Master, we quite often pick up respiratory fatigue or cardiac fatigue that is limiting oxygen supply to the periphery. And we can adjust our program based on to support what the athlete is already telling us in their perceived exertion or in their response to the training.
Hence the importance of doing it regularly or semi-regularly, so that you have a base value, and then you can compare that base value to the further tests that you do, like you said, in maybe those situations where you want to see what's going on under the hood on any given day. You talked about watts, so we'd probably be talking about a bike, but how do you pick the right modality for a step test?
Yeah, really specificity is key. So in a perfect world, you would test the athlete in the sport that they're going to be most involved with. If they're a cyclist, test them on a bike. If they're a runner, test them running. Again, the benefit of VO2 Master is it's portable enough that you can use it in a number of different modalities. So we've tested people on a skate mill, so hockey players on a skate mill, or cross-country skiers out on the road, or on a cross-country ski mill. So the benefit of testing in the sport that you're doing, same with, we used to test rowers on a bike because it was the only way that you could get a big cumbersome VO2 monitor to actually assess them on a graded test, was to put them on something that was easy to control. Well, we have ergs now that measure wattage very accurately, and we have VO2 masters that we can put on athletes and do very good assessments for rowers in the sport that they're doing. And you can even take it out on the water now. So that, I mean, even better than testing them on an erg is to actually have them testing it on the water.
Last question that I have for you is, when would you use a short step test? You talked about the different stages that can be a rather short or longer lengths. When would you use a short step test, continuous step test? And when would you use a long step test, maybe with breaks even between intervals?
Yeah, so the short step test, the only real reason to do a short step test is either the athlete is unfit and unable to do a longer step test, or you're really looking towards the maximal value. So you want to shorten up the test so that they can get to a maximum before they get too tired. The other pieces of that puzzle of what happens physiologically during the ramp up is lost if you do the step test too quickly. So really the only values you get out of a step test is some sort of threshold. So we quite often use short step tests for FTP determination. And there's some automated versions of that. Trainer Road uses a 1-minute step test to determine FTP. And then getting up to maximal levels to see what kind of performance people can put out at the end of a very quick ramp up. The longer you do the test, the more physiologic data you're going to collect. And that does become difficult for some people to interpret. We're including more and more automation in helping understand what happens over long periods of time, so that coaches aren't having to walk through reams and reams of data over a long step test. You mentioned a stop and go test. There's quite a common test that's being used by a number of your listeners, called the 5-1-5, which is 5 minutes of intensity, 1 minute of total rest, then back to a 5 minutes intensity again, and stepping up. There's people modifying that to 3-1-3s or 3-and-1s, so 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, and then 3 minutes at the next intensity. There are some good values to those, is because what happens in the physiology during rest after a hard intensity and how the body recovers in that 1 minute of rest has some very key components physiologically to how the distance systems recover and adjust to the higher and higher intensities, especially if you're using a Moxie monitor. Some of those reoxygenation levels and things can give good insights into how the other systems are working: cardiac system, muscular system, respiratory system. So the longer the test, the more physiologic data you're going to get, and the more you're able to tease out the ability of an athlete to sustain at any given point without changes to their physiology. So it helps break down thresholds much easier and gives much better information at that detailed level that you're looking for in your coaching.
So for people watching here and who want more information on those different step tests, we're going to do follow-up videos on the short step test and the long step test. So make sure you check those links in the description below. Make sure you like the video and comment if you have any questions about step tests in general or anything else. We'll be happy to reply, and we'll see you in the next video.